Hello and welcome back to Scouching. About a year ago I put together a recap going back over the 2019 World Junior Championships, and I figured it would be a good exercise to do it again and examine some of the draft eligibles, so let's get right into it. So to get started, we're going to look at the team that got relegated, which was the Kazakhs. In the preview that I had put together on Scouching.ca that I will link below in the description, Kazakhstan was the team that I thought was a shoo-in to get relegated back to Division 1A next year. But I have to give them credit. Last year they put together a really admirable effort with great goaltending and great leadership up front from guys like Artur Gatyatov, and this year was really no different. The team's quality wasn't really on the same level, and the team that most of them play for in Nur-Sultan back in Kazakhstan has only won 7 games this year in the MHL, which is not the most competitive league, so I kinda knew going in that this wasn't going to be their year. But they put together some really tight, close games against Slovakia and Switzerland, and in my opinion, I thought Maxim Musorov made a pretty strong case for him to be maybe an overage pick in the late rounds of this year's draft. He was elusive, he was slippery, he was aggressive on forechecks, and he led the team in scoring with 6 points in 7 games. So while relegation was almost a foregone conclusion with this team, and I didn't really see a ton of talent coming down the pipe for next year for this team, they did put up a valiant effort, and especially in 2019. These 2 years were really memorable years for the Kazakh Hockey Federation. Next up, we're going to look at the team that relegated the Kazakhs, which was the Germans this year. I was really pleased with the Germans' effort this year. They were in a very tough group. Canada, the United States, Russia, and the Czech Republic are really no slouch, and the Germans were really in tough in this tournament. But when you're buoyed by 2 top NHL prospects in Dominik Bach and Moritz Seider, and you have 3 potential first-round draft picks in the 2020 draft in Tim Stützle, Lukas Reichel, and John-Jason Peterka, the Germans showed that they have a bright future ahead with these young players. I thought Tim Stützle cemented himself as a potential top 5 pick in this year's draft, and Lukas Reichel and John-Jason Peterka, to me, really showed that they can play with the best of them. With at least Reichel and Peterka likely to return next year, and maybe even Stützle, combined with a supporting cast of guys like Simon Gnip and Max Glutzel and Filip Verejka, I think this team has a really bright future for next year's tournament, and it does look like their group is a little bit easier, so they might be able to put something together that might even get them into the quarterfinals. So I'm really excited for what they could put together next year, and I thought they showed really well. Up next we have the Slovakians, and once again the perennial quarterfinal fodder was eliminated in the quarterfinals. I didn't think they put together the best team they possibly could have. I didn't think their tournament went particularly well. Guys like Maxim Chajkovic didn't really produce, but you could see visible frustration with him on the ice. And with Chajkovic, you really needed him to be a major point producer, and he just did not show that he was putting in enough at both ends of the ice. Plus minus is not a great measure, but he was by a large margin the worst player on the Slovakian team in plus minus. But he did show a lot of mobility and a lot of creativity. It just kind of didn't all come together for him, and I'm looking forward to seeing him again in the tournament next year. But they did show nice pieces in terms of cultivating talent for next year's tournament and beyond. Guys like Samuel Konazko I thought looked really good considering the role that he was put in. Marko Staka might be one of the more underrated later round guys in this year's draft for me if you like defensive defensemen. He's a young but smart and mobile defenseman who knows how to strip players of the puck. And with late camp cut Martin Chromiak and 2021 eligible Alexei Mikluka coming next year for the Slovakian team, when you combine it with the draft eligible and potential returnee players from this roster, I think Slovakia could have a pretty good shot at getting past the quarterfinals next year even. Keeping with the teams eliminated in the quarterfinal, we're going to go to Switzerland. In the round robin, the Swedes managed to upset Finland and really throw that group through a bit of a loop. But for Switzerland to have real major success considering the names on their roster, I really expected Swiss men's league goaltender Luca Hollenstein to really stand out a lot more than he did. He ended up getting replaced in this tournament a couple of times, and I really looked for more out of him. However, similar to Maxim Musorov, personally I felt that David Aebischer, not the goaltender but the defenseman, really showed that he might be a player teams take a look at in the 2020 NHL draft after going undrafted last year. He plays in the QMJHL, his metrics are quite favorable, and he did not look out of place in this tournament, so I'm really curious to see if a team maybe turns around and picks him up in this year's draft. He's a very smooth skating, aggressive puck rushing player, and I felt that he really helped enable a lot of Switzerland's offense to at least try to win games. I just felt that the talent on the Swiss team just really wasn't quite enough to do a lot of damage in this tournament, unless a player like Hollenstein saves every puck that he faces. While there was a nice supporting cast of guys like Tim Burney and 2020 eligible Simon Kanak and Valentin Nussbaumer, The only really notable player eligible to return for next year is Simon Kanak, and he's not necessarily a highly regarded draft prospect for this year, so I am a bit skeptical of the direction the Swiss team is going moving forward. Another team eliminated in the quarterfinal this year was the Czech Republic. The data I had going into the tournament with the Czech Republic was extremely favorable. They were the third-ranked team in average NHLE score, and they were led by Jeník, and unfortunately Jeník ended up with an injury that is likely to put him out for the remainder of this season. I was really looking forward to seeing a full tournament out of Jeník as a leader on this team, and I really felt that if they had everyone they were supposed to have, they could have done some real damage in this tournament. I really liked the team the Czech Republic brought, and on home ice I was kinda hoping that they might go a bit further than they did. But I felt that that team, all things considered, did look pretty good. But the thing I think the Czech Republic can take away from this tournament is that penalties certainly will kill you. They spent nearly 3 more minutes per game shorthanded than any other team in the tournament. And when you combine that with a 65% penalty kill, you're going nowhere. It just won't work. But the promising thing for the Czechs is that that is a fixable issue. That's mostly something between the ears that you can fix with a bit more discipline. And when you look at the roster they crafted, there's a lot of really talented players they can bring back. Guys like Jaromír Pitlick, Jan Mysak, Michael Tepley, Simon Kubicek, and Adam Raska. Those are all pretty solid prospects with some real high-end talent in there, and they do have more coming down the pipe. This could be a pretty good team next year. And while Lukáš Dostál isn't eligible for next year's tournament, you look at Jan Bednar and Nick Malik, and those are 2 pretty solid goaltenders for this team, and in this tournament, a hot goaltender can take you a long way, so I have high expectations for this team next year. Closing out the quarterfinals, I want to talk about the Americans. I went into this tournament thinking that the Americans were one of the biggest threats to win this tournament, especially when you look at their forward group. They arguably had 3 full lines of real high-octane offensive talent on this roster. But the USA and its fans have to feel after this tournament that this was a bit of a disappointment. However, I feel that this is something that happens in this tournament every year. There are 5 really major hockey nations at this tournament, and there's only 4 spots in the semifinals, so someone always goes home disappointed by default. But I will say that there were tactical decisions on this team that really confused me. Things like separating Cole Caulfield from Alex Turcotte, playing Alex Turcotte third-line minutes, limiting Arthur Kaliev's minutes and still getting really good results out of him per minute that he played, limiting Trevor Zegras' minutes early on in the tournament. There were just a lot of really weird line combinations and ice time distributions that just kind of lead me to believe that maybe, yeah, this team just didn't jive well together, and maybe there might be some coaching changes that come for next year's tournament. And in the quarterfinal game against Finland, I know people are disappointed by losing 1-0, but when you watch that game again, it's really remarkable how well the Finns clogged up the middle of the ice, something the United States junior teams love to do. They love to break up the ice with a ton of speed and get that fast break offense going. But I really don't feel that a summit is really needed to reevaluate how the US team raises their prospects and develops them for future success. And if you are a little bit disappointed with this year's National Team Development Program, I'm just going to read all of the names on this team that are eligible to return for next season. Alex Turcotte, Cam York, Trevor Zegras, Nicholas Robertson, Bobby Brink, John Beecher, Spencer Knight, and Arthur Kaliev. Even if half of those players go to the NHL next year, that is a ridiculous crop of talent for the Americans, and I really think that next year they have just as good of a shot of getting onto the podium as anyone else, if not a better shot. So I'm not really sure that this was so much a failure of a tournament as much as it was just a simple disappointment. And like I said, this happens to one team every single year, and unfortunately for the Americans this year, the Finns played a perfect game and eliminated them. With that, we go to the medal round. We start with the 4th place finishers, the Finns. To me, the performance of the Finns in this tournament really peaked in the quarterfinal when they shut down the Americans to get to the semifinals. Going into this tournament, I felt that they didn't bring the strongest team in the tournament, and they did leave some good, talented young players at home. But they did do a good job in that game sitting back and countering a really terrifying offense and scoring when it mattered, and winning 1-0. Justus Annunen, obviously with the shutout against the Americans, also looked pretty good in the preliminary games, and he did show that he is a legit talent, and the numbers in the Finnish Liga are indicative of a pretty solid goaltender. Matias Maccelli had an absolute coming out party. He's a player I had my eye on last year in the draft, and I was surprised to see him slip a little bit, but the steps that he's taken in his game since last year have been otherworldly, and he showcased quite a few reasons why he was dominating in the Liga this season. He's a creative, fleet-of-foot playmaker who can also score on his own stick. He was creating chances for his line mates left, right, and center, and I have a lot of respect for how he showed up to this tournament and really took a leadership role on the Finns. And looking at names that didn't make this team that probably will be back next year, you've got the injured Anton Lundell, you've got Atu Ratu, you've got Kasper Simontoval, Topi Niemela, Viti Miettinen, Antti Tuomisto, plus all the players on this team that can come back. I think the Finns are just reloading for next year's tournament. They're going to have a pretty good team next year as well. I don't think this team was the strongest one available. I don't think this is the strongest team they ever had, but considering how they played, I have to give kudos to the Finns. I thought this was a really strong fourth place finish, if there is such a thing. So now we go to the bronze medal winners, the Swedes. The Swedes last year were marked by a lack of offense. They had a really hard time putting the puck in the net, and it showed, and it ended up ending their tournament. But that was totally turned on its head this year when they led the preliminary rounds in scoring and continued their preliminary round win streak and extended it to 52 games. That extends back to before I graduated high school in 2008. Now that loss to the Russians in the semifinal was absolutely soul-crushing. I really wanted to see the Swedes compete for a gold medal, but I also do have a tremendous amount of respect for Russian junior teams and how they approach this tournament. But Swedes, as a Canadian, there's a motto that I have coming into this tournament every year that I always like to remind myself of. If there's anything that a Russian junior hockey team is capable of, it is breaking your heart. Or, if you want me to translate it into Swedish, om det finns något som ett rysk juniorhockeylag kan, så bryter det hjärtan. But as a draft analyst, I really wanted to see the draft-eligible players play for this Swedish team. Alex Holtz and Lucas Raymond certainly did not look out of place at this tournament, and I thought they cemented their position as top 10 picks in this year's upcoming draft. Lucas Raymond showed that he is a bit pigeonholed with Frölunda. I thought he was an extremely strong puck mover along the boards, and just a guy who does all the little things really, really well, while also being able to turn on the jets and dangle the pants off of you if he sees the opportunity. And Alex Holtz showed that his skating and speed is relatively underrated and he's not just a one-trick pony. I still have questions about his defensive shortcomings and his defensive awareness, but that's really kind of something that goes by the wayside when you look at his potential offensively. He can be a lethal scorer, but he also has a nice playmaking side that did show up in this tournament from time to time. He's a nice all-around offensive talent, and I thought he had a really good tournament as well. They also brought a historically good defense group this year, and I thought they played pretty well in front of Hugo Alnefelt, who also played extremely well in this tournament. And I think that especially Leafs fans, Rangers fans, and Coyotes fans should be very excited about Rasmus Sandin, Nils Lundqvist, and Victor Soderstrom. I thought those three players in particular had very, very strong tournaments. And I'm sure the player that a lot of my viewers would like me to mention is Nils Höglander, and he showed the best and worst parts of his game in this tournament. Some undisciplined penalties, especially the major against Russia that ended up putting them down 1-0 right away. That stuff is not ideal. But when you look at the positives that Höglander brings, he's an unbelievably talented and skilled offensive player. I will never tire of him being creative, especially behind the net, whether it's a lacrosse move or flipping the puck over the net to a teammate in front of the net. I don't know what he's going to think of next, but I'm really excited to see what he can do. So while he might need to refine his discipline and his defensive play wasn't particularly great, that is an extremely talented player that I think the Vancouver Canucks fans should be very excited for. And so we go to the gold medal game. The silver medal went to the Russians this season, and I knew going into this tournament that the Russians were relatively undervalued. Based on the players they brought and what I had seen of them, I knew that this team had tremendous amounts of talent. Dmitry Voronkov, Kirill Marchenko, Vasily Podkolzin, Yaroslav Askarov, Amir Miftakov, Alexander Romanov. There's a ton of players on this team that have been very good back in Russia. The day that I'm shooting this is the day we found out that Yegor Zamula was playing injured that whole tournament. And I don't know about you, but I was watching a lot of Russian hockey in that tournament, and Yegor Zamula certainly did not look hurt. And I think if I'm a Philadelphia Flyers fan, especially since he didn't even cost a draft pick, that's one I'm really keeping an eye on moving forward. He was really fantastic. And the difference between previous years and this year, where they brought more offense and more skill and more fun, to be frank, and until the end of the Canada game, they were much more disciplined as well. Based on the roster they constructed and the way that team played, I think the future with Russian hockey is pretty bright. So now we're going to talk about the ending of the gold medal game for the Russians here. I think that gold medal game was one of the best I've ever seen. The Russians should be extremely proud of the performance they put up. Yes, the TV camera thing is less than ideal. That stinks. But the behavior that some of the players exhibited from there until the end of the game really removed any realistic shot of the Russians winning this game. And just like the Czech Republic and their penalties, a lack of discipline is also something that can really knock you out of this tournament, and it showed with the Russians at the end of that game. But we always have to remind ourselves that these people are teenagers. We were all teenagers at one point too, and pretty emotional, and things might just rub us the wrong way. And with the Russians, at the end of that game, it kinda got out of their hands, and unfortunately it cost them the gold medal. But outside of that, I really liked the tournament that the Russians put together, and I'm really hopeful for them moving forward. Unfortunately, just Podkolzin, Askarov, and Groshev are going to be the only players eligible to return, but coming up you have a ton of really good Russian talent available. Arseniy Gritsyuk, Yegor Spiridonov, Dmitry Sheshin, Rodion Amirov, Semyon Chistikov, Danil Guschin, and yes, my boy Marat Kisamudinov. And I think that with the breadth of talent the Russians have, they should be able to ice a very competitive team next year as well. So now we go to the Canadians. The Canadians were absolutely stacked going into this tournament. There's no real way to slice it. This team should have been in the gold medal game. Now, as is tradition, the Canadians often didn't make it look particularly easy, but they pulled it off, their third gold medal in 6 years. Joel Hofer stole the show on multiple occasions, and Akil Thomas scoring that goal at the end of the game is just mwah, 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 mwah. It was just awesome. I'm such a huge fan of Akil Thomas, and I'm so excited to see what he can do with the Kings in the coming years. So while 7 players are eligible to return, the guys that didn't make this team that could be on this team next year should make Canada's team another powerhouse. Alex Newhook, Sam Poulin, Philip Tomasino, Jameson Rees, Jakob Pelletier, Ryan Suzuki, Braden Tracy, Thomas Harley, Peyton Krebs, Dylan Holloway, Connor Zari, Braden Schneider. There's tons of options for the Canadian team next year. So some overall thoughts to close this video. First of all, congratulations to the Canadian team on their gold medal, the Russian team on their silver medal after that phenomenal gold medal game, and the bronze medal winners, the Swedes. Those 3 teams played really good hockey almost entirely throughout this whole tournament. The semi-final between Sweden and Russia was also fantastic and a ton of fun to watch. The trio of German players showcasing what they're capable of was also really exciting, and I think those players are very, very valuable going into the draft. The Swedes got great goaltending with a historically good defense class and a real fun, high-octane offense, and I had a lot of fun watching that team play as well. So looking forward to next year, Kazakhstan is the team that got relegated, and the Austrians are the team that's coming in next season. Now, it might be easy to just write off the Austrian junior team, and this year they won their tournament largely on the back of an ineligible player next year in Benjamin Baumgartner, a player who should probably get himself a draft pick in the coming draft, wink wink. But Marco Rossi may very well be there, and when you look at names like Senna Peters and Timo Nickel, there are legitimate prospects that should be on this Austrian team next year. So while I would expect them to be the team that gets relegated rather than, say, Switzerland or Slovakia or Germany, I do think that they will bring a roster that will be somewhat competitive in this tournament. And I want to close with one more thing. At the same time as this tournament was going on, the IIHF World Women's Under-18 Championship was going on. It ended in an absolutely thrilling gold medal game between the United States and Canada. Kiara Zanin is an extremely talented young woman for the US team, and she scored her overtime winning goal after Canada tied it relatively late in the game. Eve Gascon stood on her head for the Canadians in that game, and that game could have gone either way. And by the end of that game, there were over 10,000 people watching the live stream on a website called livestream.com, which I didn't even know existed. The camera work in the early days of the tournament was shameful, but no matter what, there were people watching. And with all of those shortcomings in terms of visibility and production quality, the hockey was really exciting, and I cannot stress how exciting the future of women's hockey is. The Under-18 women's tournament used to be the Canada and US show. Canada would score 10 goals against Finland, for crying out loud. Last year's tournament and this year's have had close games almost every single game. So while there is still a gap in women's hockey between Canada, the United States, and the rest of the world, I feel very strongly that the rest of the world is pushing Canada and the US much harder than they ever have before. These girls can play, and there is no longer an excuse for this to not be at least streamed on a major broadcaster, especially in Canada. let alone broadcasted on television just like the boys tournament is. So I'm gonna paint a picture to close this video of what my dream scenario for the 2021 World Juniors Festival is. The boys tournament is held in Alberta, and I could not find a real source on the location for the girls tournament next year, but I feel like putting the women's tournament back in Europe somewhere for next year, keeping the boys tournament in Edmonton and Red Deer, would allow you to split the time zones and effectively broadcast for essentially the whole day. You could take some up-and-coming broadcasting talent and send them to Europe for the trip of a lifetime to broadcast that tournament, or at least commentate it as it's streamed online on TSN Direct. And in order to make it a little bit more accessible, I would also maybe want to see a World Junior specific TSN Direct package. It only extends for the games in the tournament, it's dirt cheap, kids could afford it, and I really think it would go a long way to getting more eyeballs on not just the boys tournament, but also this girls tournament. I cannot stress enough how exciting it was to watch them play hockey. You could even make a tournament for under 20s instead of under 18s to add some more visible players. I don't know, anything but janky live streams on livestream.com, and they still pulled 10,000 people to watch the gold medal game. TSN took the boys tournament many years ago and basically forced it upon us and made it a cultural tradition. And I think in 2021 or even 2022, we could really do the same thing for the women's game. It was a phenomenal tournament. So thank you all for joining me on this recap of the World Juniors. I had a ton of fun watching the hockey in this tournament and the women's tournament. If you liked the video, you can click all the buttons below me so you never miss another one. If you really liked it, you could support us on Patreon, where you get access to all kinds of perks like a Discord chat room, exclusive access to data sheets, track data from the Scouching Report videos that are upcoming, or discounts for merchandise like the t-shirt I'm wearing right now. So that's it, and thanks for watching. And now is the time where the rubber meets the road for me, as the next video series is going to be our 2020 Scouching Reports, and I cannot wait to show you what I've got.